Food, you won't leave. That message sat, food, you won't leave. That message sat on my screen at 11:47 p.m., right when the repo tracker would ping if my payment bounced, so my hands kept sliding on the steering wheel like the rubber had turned slick. Detours cost money. This one cost time. Night driving teaches a person to trust boring things because headlights lie and fatigue lies. But the map voice is supposed to be dumb and honest, which is why the sudden silence from my dashboard felt like a finger pressed to my lips. A wooden placard leaned against a sawhorse at the split in the road, and someone had stenciled G6 on it in black paint that looked fresh enough to smear, so I went left even though the right lane looked like the safer choice. The town sat ahead like a postcard that forgot to yellow with lit windows and clean sidewalks, but the air in my car carried a faint smoke smell that didn't match the empty sky. Skeptical felt like my default setting back then, because gig driving teaches a person that most weird stories are just people selling attention. A route line appeared on my phone and then jumped a few feet sideways, like the map couldn't decide which curb belonged to the road, and my dash cam chirped the way it does when it starts a new clip. The first building on Main looked like a diner, and the second looked like a hardware store, and the third reflected my headlights wrong, as if the glass had been polished that morning. A red banner hung between two lampposts with letters that had been repainted over older scorch marks, and it read, "No free detours," in a cheerful font that made my stomach tighten. A figure crossed the street at the far end of the block, but the dash cam playback showed an empty frame when I tapped it, which forced me to keep rolling forward, because stopping suddenly felt like agreeing to something. Another pop-up blinked, the same gray header my app uses for safety notices, and the tagline under it said G6 in tiny text that looked slightly pixel-smeared. "Do not accept anything offered." My jaw clicked the way it does when I'm counting down a bad decision because the payment clock in my head was louder than the empty sidewalks. County Road 7 had been a straight shot past the feed store and the old grain elevator. But the detour shoved me toward town like a hand at my back, so I told myself I'd cut through and be out in 10 minutes. A low fluorescent hum came from the diner windows, steady and wrong, and my phone vibrated twice in its mount like it wanted to shake loose. The catalytic failure that made me hate detours started months earlier, when I followed a faster route around an accident and ended up on a washed-out bridge. I didn't stop that night either because my rating mattered more than my gut. And the angry note I got afterward still sits in my head like a pebble I can't spit out. The only adult I owed anything real to was my sister, who couldn't drive after surgery, and I'd promised I'd get her to a follow-up appointment by morning. A green highway sign at the edge of town listed no exits at all, just blank reflective metal, which made my throat go dry because my brain tried to do math without numbers. The curb felt too smooth under my tires, almost warm, and the streetlights threw shadows that didn't line up with the poles. A lone car sat angled near the hardware store, hazard lights clicking in perfect rhythm, and a person stood by the trunk with both hands raised like surrender. The pop-up on my phone refreshed, and the bottom line had a torn look like a bad screenshot. "If you stop you become part of the route." That should have been enough to keep moving. But the stranded driver swayed like someone fighting dizziness. So my foot hit the brake because leaving a person stranded in a dead town felt worse than losing a night of work. My stress habit kicked in, and my thumb flicked to my driver stats without thinking. Then I shoved the phone face down on the seat, because shame makes me do childish things. The dashcam timer on the screen in my rear view froze for a beat, then restarted at the same second, and my pulse jumped, because the camera never does that unless the card is failing. The stranded driver looked older than me, adult tired, and the voice that came out sounded thin. "Phone won't call." "Keep your doors locked," I said, which sounded like a rule I'd learned from the internet, but my hand still reached for the lock out of reflex. The stranger's eyes flicked to the diner, then back to my face. "They keep waving." My mouth wanted to say nobody was waving, but the corner of my eye caught a movement behind the diner glass. A slow arm motion that didn't match the way a person waves at a car. A crumpled paper sat under the stranger's windshield wiper, and when I leaned close enough to see it, my skin prickled because the paper looked too clean for the car, like it had been folded minutes ago. The note had a coffee ring on one corner and handwriting that pressed hard enough to leave grooves, and it read, "Don't take what they offer. Don't take the receipt." I felt stupid for believing a random note, but my fingers still tapped the door latch twice, a nervous rhythm I picked up working for a delivery warehouse, because some part of me wanted a ritual that would keep the night predictable. The stranger's hazard lights stopped mid-click. Not dimmed, stopped. Even the diner hum seemed to hold its breath, and that sudden quiet forced me to look up at the diner windows again. A man stood inside the diner doorway, older, heavy in the shoulders, and his posture had the economy of someone who'd done the same motion 1,000 times, which made him feel like the only normal object in town. He stepped onto the sidewalk with his hands visible, and the smell of grease from the diner rolled out behind him like a memory. "Don't eat anything," the older man said. "That's not even on the sign," I said, because my brain clung to logic like a railing. The older man didn't blink. "Food is permission." The older man nodded once toward my passenger seat like he already knew I had company. Then he turned and walked back inside without another word, leaving the door swinging slowly as if the air resisted closing. My stomach tightened because the older man's certainty felt worse than any ghost story I'd ever laughed at, and I couldn't afford to be wrong with my car payment hanging over my head. The stranger in the broken-down car sagged against the trunk. "Can I sit?" The rule on my phone said not to stop, and the note said not to take, but a human body asking for a chair doesn't sound like a trap. So I broke the quiet rule in my head and popped my passenger door. Resource loss arrived like a petty punishment, because the moment the stranger sat down, my navigation app dropped 1 bar of signal, and my screen dimmed as if the phone had decided it was tired too. My gear sat where it always sits on a work night, and I noticed it like a prayer, because I needed something solid. Dash cam stuck behind the mirror, cheap flashlight wedged by the seatbelt buckle, tire inflator under the driver's seat, and a thermal blanket rolled tight in the trunk that still smelled faintly like plastic. The map voice came back, but the pitch was slightly off, too slow, as if another person was copying it, which made me swallow hard because my skepticism didn't have a place to put that. The stranger pressed their palms to their knees and breathed shallow. "Town looks new." "Town burned," I muttered, then stopped myself because saying it out loud felt like giving the place a hook. A metal brochure rack sat near the diner entrance with a pamphlet titled welcome. And the paper looked bright, but the corner edges had a faint black smudge, like old soot that never truly comes out. My thumb hovered over the Report Hazard button on my map, because a part of me still wanted to believe this was a prank detour, a bad data layer, something fixed by a tap. I told myself I'd do the responsible thing and log it, so I hit report, typed road closed /false town, and watched the confirmation banner appear for half a second before it slid upward and vanished, like it had never been there. My chest tightened, and a hot blush crawled up my neck. Because if the system didn't keep the report, then nothing I said would exist later. A small lie sat under my tongue anyway, because I had already told my sister I'd be home early, and I hadn't mentioned that I was still chasing fares at midnight. The older man reappeared in the diner doorway with a mug in his hand, steam rising in a straight line, and he held it out toward my passenger like it weighed nothing. The stranger's eyes went hungry in a way that scared me, because thirst makes people reckless, and I felt the duty split in me like a crack. The note said, "Don't take what they offer," but my passenger looked like someone who might faint, so I took the mug myself, thinking I'd be the barrier between rule and person. The ceramic felt oddly cold through the handle, colder than the night air, and the steam smelled like coffee until it didn't, until it carried a dry, chalky scent, like someone had blown out a candle. The older man watched my hands, not my face. "Don't finish it. Just a sip," I said, and my own voice sounded defensive, which made my teeth grind. The mug touched my lips, and the liquid inside didn't taste like coffee, not even bad coffee, but like warm water with grit. So I jerked back, and my gag reflex hit hard. The diner lights flickered once, then twice, then held steady again, and outside the window the hardware store paint peeled in a single rippling sheet, dropping to the sidewalk like a curtain. My brain tried to call it a hallucination, so I did what I always do when I'm scared of being blamed. I checked a recording. A dash cam playback showed me taking the mug, but the frame behind my shoulder held a second outline, taller, standing close enough that it should have bumped me, and the camera's auto exposure washed the outline into a pale blur that didn't match any human shape. Earned belief didn't come with a shiver or a prayer. It came with that video, and the way the time stamp on the clip changed when I blinked. I turned the phone sideways and watched the seconds on the clip roll backward by 3, then forward by 5, then settle like nothing happened, which made my stomach flip, because even broken devices don't do that politely. The stranger whispered, "Put it down." The mug in my hand felt heavier, not by weight but by responsibility. So I set it on the hood of my car and watched the steam flatten, then flow toward the diner door as if the building was inhaling. A new pop-up appeared with the same gray header and the same tiny G6 tag, but the text looked misprinted, a missing line like a torn label. "If you accept, do not, the town will..." I hated that I couldn't read it, because incomplete rules feel like a setup, and my mind kept trying to fill in the blanks. The older man stepped closer and spoke without warmth, like a mechanic giving a warning about brakes. "When the offer comes twice, leave." My fingers tapped the latch again, twice, because my body wanted to do something that looked like control. The street behind me looked longer than it had when I pulled in, stretching toward darkness like it was made of rubber, and my headlights didn't reach the end anymore. A reasonable hypothesis tried to rescue me. The map data had glitched, and the buildings were some kind of film set, and the older man was an actor pulling a prank for tourists. The other hypothesis, the one my brain didn't want, rose anyway. The rules were the system here, and obeying them fed something that didn't need a name. To test the first one, I killed my phone screen and slid it into the glove box, because no map, no trap, and my car didn't need the app to leave. The dashboard clock snapped forward, then backward, then landed on the same minute it had already shown twice, which made my breath catch because the car clock, I thought, doesn't care about phones. My passenger stared at the glove box like the phone was alive. It still knows. A sound came from the diner, a thin, papery rasp, like someone turning a page very slowly, and it continued even after the older man stood still in the doorway, hands empty. That sound forced me to look through the diner window again, because pages turn when someone chooses an entry. A guest book sat open on the counter inside, and no one touched it. Yet the pages lifted and fell in a measured rhythm that matched my heart rate too closely. My throat tightened. Stupid, so stupid. The older man said, almost bored, "Don't let them write the reason." The older man walked back inside, and the page turn sound stopped the instant the door shut, leaving a silence so complete that even my engine idle sounded intrusive. The map voice spoke from my dash anyway, even with my phone hidden, and the words came out in the same cheerful tone. "Proceed to detour." The voice didn't belong to my phone anymore, and that thought made me move, because staying still felt like consenting. My car rolled forward, and the streetlights along Main blinked in sequence one by one, as if guiding me deeper, which made the rule inversion hit like a slap. Following the detour wasn't avoiding danger. It was the danger. The banner that said "No free detours" hung ahead again, but now the scorch marks under the paint looked like fingerprints. My passenger coughed once, dry, and their voice shook. "Water." A pro-social choice doesn't feel noble in the moment. It feels like picking the least awful option. So I pulled into the diner lot anyway because my passenger needed something and my guilt needed a target. The older man stood behind the counter now, and a laminated card lay beside the guest book, with a staple shadow across the corner, and in faded print it said, "If you need drink, pay with proof." Proof meant evidence, and evidence meant recordings, which made my stomach drop because everything I'd tried to save had been vanishing. The older man slid a glass of water forward without lifting his eyes. My passenger reached for it, and I caught their wrist gently, because touching another adult like that feels intimate and wrong. But watching them drink felt worse. The older man finally looked up. "One swallow, then go." I broke another rule in my head and handed the glass to my passenger, because duty is louder than superstition when someone might pass out. The water went down, and my passenger's shoulders lowered in relief for 1 second. Then the diner wall behind them cracked in a spiderweb pattern that spread too fast for physics. The crack sound never arrived. Silence swallowed it whole, and the sudden lack of noise made me flinch so hard my seatbelt cut my collarbone. My passenger whispered, "Something's wrong with the air." The smell changed, not like smoke, but like damp paper left in a hot car, and the clean diner tiles under my boots felt gritty when I shifted my weight. A reward beat hit hard and simple. The glass on the counter wasn't glass anymore, not fully, but a dull gray cup with soot under the rim, and the older man touched it like it was normal. The older man said, They rebuilt the town. The fire never ended. I stared at the laminated card again, because the staple shadow made it feel official, but the bottom line had been scraped, half missing. Never show them. My mouth opened, then closed, because asking questions felt like stepping into the guest book, and I couldn't afford to donate my reason for being here. Another thought jabbed at me. My sister's appointment, the promise, the way my phone would show missed calls that I'd have to explain. If I left now and my car locked later, I'd lose the only work I had, and my sister would be stranded in a different way, so my legs didn't move, even though my brain screamed to go. A small sticker sat on the edge of the guest book cover, and it had G6 printed on it in the same font as the pop-ups, which made my skin crawl because the town wasn't random. It was categorized. I didn't register that then, not really, because my attention stayed on the cracking wall, so I missed what G6 actually meant. My hand moved anyway, and I yanked the guest book toward me, because if pay with proof was the loophole, then proof could be traded like money. The older man didn't stop me. Photograph only, no names. That line sounded like mercy, but mercy from systems always has a cost. So I snapped a photo of the open page without reading it and shoved the book back like it burned. My phone buzzed in the glove box, and when I opened it, the screen showed the photo already attached to an unsent hazard report, as if the system had been waiting for compliance. A new pop-up appeared. Crisp now. No missing words. If you accept drink, you must submit proof. Proof keeps the road. That rule wasn't about safety. It was about feeding the map with evidence, and the realization hit me with a cold wave of anger that forced action instead of panic. I hit send. The report bar filled to 100%, and for a breath my dash showed a normal route out of town, a clean blue line with an exit arrow which felt like relief I could touch. My passenger exhaled and leaned back. We can go. The older man didn't smile. Don't thank them. We walked out and the street lights stayed steady for the first time, which made the world look almost normal until I noticed the sidewalks had a thin layer of ash-colored dust that my shoes left no prints in. A moral dilemma hit me like a bad split in the road, because the route out of town ran past the broken-down car where my passenger had come from, and leaving it behind felt like leaving a clue that would pull another driver in. I could take time to push that car into the lane as a barrier, which would risk my own exit window, or I could follow the new route immediately and save the person already in my car. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the thought of being the reason another adult got trapped, so I chose the slower option and turned toward the stranded car. My passenger grabbed my sleeve. Don't! I can't leave it open, I said, and the words came out harsh, because guilt makes my tone ugly. The older man called from the diner doorway, and his voice carried flat across the street. Block the road. Lose the road. Every competence win costs something, so I took the thermal blanket from my trunk instead, wrapped it around the stranded car's driver's side mirror, and tied it tight enough that the mirror would look broken from a distance. That felt pathetic, but it was a warning disguised as debris, and I hated that this was the kind of problem-solving my life had become. When I returned to my car, the map route had shortened by a block, and the exit arrow pulsed like a heartbeat. My passenger stared at the banner again. No free detours. Yeah, I said, and my catchphrase slipped out without permission. Keep it moving, okay? The road out of town narrowed into a tree-lined stretch that shouldn't exist because I'd driven in from open fields, but now the branches pressed close, and the leaves shimmered like metal foil under my headlights. My dash cam beeped once, and the screen showed a live view of my own car from above, like a drone shot, even though I didn't own any camera like that. A theory bait thought stabbed through me. Maybe this wasn't supernatural. Maybe this was an experiment, a compliance trap built into map routing. And the older man was the only person not part of it. The second theory pushed back just as hard. The town wasn't trying to kill anyone, it was trying to file them. The map line on my screen redrew by a single block each time I glanced away. Not when I touched the phone, but when my eyes left it, which forced me to keep staring forward like a kid obeying a teacher. The trees ended at a cross street, and an old brick building rose in my headlights, and a painted sign on the wall said, "Fire Station," in letters so clean they looked wet. A brass bell hung above the station door, and it swung on its own in tiny movements. Not enough to ring, just enough to promise it could. The earlier pop-up came back in my mind, the torn one about stopping. And a new rule surfaced from the laminated card I'd photographed, because the photo had burned itself into my screen. When the bell rings, do not turn around. The air tasted dry and gritty again, and my passenger pressed their forehead to the window like they were trying to see their own breath. The bell moved more, and a faint vibration came through the steering column, and my fingers tightened because my body wanted to check behind me to make sure nothing followed. A sudden urge hit me to apologize to my sister, to confess that I had lied about being on my way, and shame forced a decision. I called her anyway, even though my phone signal had been wrong all night. The call connected, and instead of her voice, my own voice came back through the speaker, delayed by half a second, repeating the last thing I'd said to the older man. "Don't thank them." The bell rang once. My shoulders jerked instinctively, and my eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror before I could stop them, because humans look back when bells ring. In the mirror, the street behind my car wasn't tree-lined anymore. It was Main Street again, and the diner sign flickered, and a line of people stood on the sidewalk facing my car, with their hands held out as if waiting for something. My passenger whispered, "Drive." The exit arrow on my map spun in place, then pointed straight toward the fire station door, which made the reverse escape logic click in my head like a trap closing. The moment I tried to leave, the system rerouted me deeper. I did what competent people do when a system lies. I tried a different input. My tire inflator came out from under the seat, and I jammed it into the cigarette lighter port and turned it on, because noise and vibration can sometimes shake a stuck sensor. The inflator whined, high and steady, and the bell over the fire station door stopped swinging, which felt like a win I didn't deserve. The air inside the car warmed slightly, then cooled fast, and the map arrow snapped back toward the tree-lined exit, which made hope flare like a match. We crossed the intersection, and the brick building fell behind us, and for a full minute, the town didn't chase, which felt like a concrete relief. I could breathe. The dashboard clock held steady. The map voice returned to its normal pitch. My passenger laughed once, a short, broken sound, because relief doesn't know how to behave. A mile later, highway guardrails appeared, and a reflective sign showed a county line. And my lungs filled for the first time all night because the world finally looked like the world. Then my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't earned, and the header was the same gray safety banner with G6 in tiny print. "Thank you for complying." A second banner slid up behind it, clean and cruel. Route recalculated, proceed to detour. The guardrails ended. The trees ended. Main Street opened ahead again like the town had been waiting behind my eyes, and the false victory dissolved so fast my stomach lurched. My passenger stared at the windshield like it might crack. We were out. We weren't, I said, and my voice sounded small, because the system had just proved that escape was a permission it could revoke. A new element appeared on my screen, and it made my skin go cold. A little blue dot labeled with my car icon. And beside it, another dot, identical, trailing one car length behind. Two of me on the same route. The dash cam beeped, and the live feed froze on a frame that showed my own brake lights from behind, as if a camera sat in the road watching me. And in the corner of the frame, a shape stood under the banner, too tall, too still, with limbs angled wrong, like a paper cutout held at the wrong distance. I stared at that frozen frame until my eyes watered because even my skeptic brain couldn't file it under glitch anymore. My passenger swallowed. That's not a person. The older man's voice came back in my head, flat as ever. Food is permission. The town offered coffee, I accepted. The town offered water, I accepted. The town offered proof, I submitted. The town had never been feeding me ash, it had been feeding the system my choices. A flicker of movement in the corner of my windshield made me turn my head, and a woman in a nurse's jacket stood on the sidewalk holding a covered dish like it was a gift, smiling too patiently. Take the food, you won't leave. The rule, take the food, you won't leave. The rule wasn't a warning. The rule was a dare. My passenger's hands trembled. Don't. A different part of me, the part that had left someone stranded on a washed-out bridge months ago, rose up with a violent refusal, because repeating that mistake felt unbearable. I upped that wasn't food, but something like up that wasn't food, but something like cold fireplace ash and wet cardboard. The nurse spoke softly, and her voice sounded like my map voice. Take it, then go. That's the trap rule, the one that sounds like a deal. My brain wanted the deal because my debt clock and my sister's appointment and my passenger's fear all lined up behind it like a crowd pushing forward. My hand moved toward the dish lid before I knew it, and my fingers brushed the edge, and the texture under my skin felt like fine grit, like crushed paper, not ceramic. The nurse's eyes widened a fraction, and the dash cam recorded a new clip without being triggered, which forced me to act like the camera mattered more than my hunger for escape. I slammed the window up. The nurse's smile dropped, just for a blink, and in that blink her face looked like a badly printed photo, features smudged in the way cheap ink smears when it gets wet. A road sign across the street flickered, and the letters on it shifted from stop to stay, which made my pulse jump, because the town wasn't even hiding its language games anymore. My shame spike hit hard and ugly. I had almost grabbed the dish because my life outside was falling apart, and that made me feel easy to buy. I did a responsible repair the only way I could think of. I made a record that couldn't be fixed quietly. The dashcam menu came up on my screen and I tapped lock clip, the option that protects a recording from being overwritten, and the device accepted the command with a click that sounded too loud in the dead air. The town reacted like I'd insulted it. Every streetlight on Main went dark at once, not gradually, not flickering, just off. And the only light left came from the diner windows and the fire station bell glowing faintly like an ember. My passenger grabbed my arm. Drive to light. "Which light?" I said, because every exit had been lying. The banner above the street swayed, though no wind touched it, and the painted words, "No free detours," looked freshly repainted, the scorch marks under them forming the faint shape of G6 again. That planted detail clicked into place in my head because G6 wasn't just a tag. It was a revision. I remembered the sticker on the guest book, the same font as my pop-ups, and I realized the town had versions, like software updates, and my compliance had upgraded the trap. The older man stepped out of the diner again, and he looked older now, cheeks more hollow, like the years were catching up and fast forward. He didn't come close. They changed the script. "What is G6?" I asked, and my voice cracked, because asking felt like stepping onto a mine. The older man didn't answer directly, which made it worse. "Sixth route, sixth burn." The bell at the fire station rang twice, and my passenger flinched, and my eyes wanted the mirror again, so I covered it with my hand, like a child hiding from a scary movie. A new pop-up flashed, not on my phone, but on the diner window. Letters glowing faintly on the glass like captions. "If you show fear, you pay with distance." Fear meant Ezekiel losing road. My breath came short anyway because fear doesn't wait for permission, and the street behind my car stretched longer, lengthening like taffy, swallowing my earlier tire tracks. I had to choose again, and the choice cut into my adult responsibilities. Keep my head down, follow whatever they wanted, get my passenger out at any cost, or break the system by warning others even if it destroyed my own work life. My catchphrase came out again, thin and desperate. "Keep it moving, okay?" My passenger stared at me like they understood the stakes better than I did. "Save somebody else." The phrase landed hard because it matched the guilt I'd been carrying since that washed-out bridge, and the moral shape of it forced my hands toward the phone. I opened the hazard report screen again, and this time the draft I'd sent earlier sat in a folder I didn't recognize, labeled simply G6, and the report showed as pending even though I'd watched it send. Evidence corruption wasn't random, it was organized. A cold frame of thought slipped in, clinical and detached, like someone else narrating. The routing system does not delete records, it relocates them. That thought wasn't mine, and it scared me enough to act fast, because if the system could add thoughts, it could take them too. I pulled into the diner lot and ran inside, because the only stable object in town had been the older man and his rules, and I needed a lever. Inside, the diner smelled less like grease now and more like damp ash, and the menu board on the wall showed blank lines where prices should be, as if the town didn't want to admit money still mattered. The guest book lay open again, and the page-turn sound returned for half a second, then stopped, like the book had noticed me. The older man slapped his palm on the book, hard, and the cover shut with a thud that felt like a boundary. "No names," the older man said again, but his eyes looked tired. "No gratitude, no eating, no bargains." A small, sharp sound came from my pocket, and when I pulled my phone out, the screen displayed my sister's contact photo even though I hadn't tapped anything, and beneath it a suggested message appeared. "Thanks for waiting." I felt sick, because the system had found the softest place in my life and put its fingers there. My voice went flat. "They'll send that." The older man nodded once, and his certainty felt like grief. "They already did." My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow, and guilt forced action again. I turned my phone off completely, not sleep mode, not dim, but dead, The diner lights steadied for a moment and the banner outside stopped swaying, which made me realize the town wanted living attention, not just devices. My passenger stood in the diner doorway, watching the street like it might run toward us. A movement outside caught my eye, and the dash cam screen on my rear view showed a live frame, even though my car sat parked. In that frame, my car door stood open. I looked up through the diner window and saw my car doors shut tight, and the contradiction forced a decision I didn't want. Go outside and check, or stay inside and risk whatever the frame was trying to lure me into. I chose outside because my passenger couldn't outrun anything in this town, and I needed the car as a shield. The sidewalk under my shoes felt spongy now, not wood, not concrete, like burned ground covered in thin new paint. And my stomach flipped because the town was decaying faster the more I resisted. My car door handle felt hot under my palm as if sunlight had baked it, even though the street lights were off, and that heat made me pull back. The dashcam screen showed a still frame again, crisp this time, and Tier 3 hit me in one clean image. A second version of me stood at the edge of the frame under the banner, holding a paper map with G6 circled in thick black ink. The figure wore my jacket. The figure's face wasn't a face, just a blur where the camera's compression couldn't resolve details. And the blur looked like moving smoke trapped inside a human outline. My breath caught. No. The figure lifted one hand and pointed not at me but at my passenger. A new rule appeared on the diner window glass in glowing letters, calm and merciless. If you bring a witness, you must trade the driver. A trade. That's the primary law, simple and procedural. Every escape costs a person or a record, and the system prefers both. My passenger stared at the glowing letters and shook their head. No. The older man stood in the diner doorway behind us, and his voice came out like a verdict. Don't let them pick. The only way to keep the system from choosing was to choose first, and that meant breaking something with intent, not panic. I grabbed my dash cam, yanked it off the windshield mount, and the adhesive strip tore with a sound like skin peeling from tape, which made my hands shake with disgust. That camera held the proof they'd been demanding, and if proof was currency, then destroying it was refusing to pay. My passenger grabbed my wrist. That's your evidence. That's their food, I said, and the words surprised me because they sounded like understanding. I shoved the dash cam into the diner sink and turned the faucet handle, and black water sputtered out. Not clear, not rusty, but gray like a storm drain, splashing over the camera lens. The camera screen went white. Outside, the banner tore down the middle in slow motion, the words, "No free detours," splitting, so the phrase looked like a warning aimed at me personally. The street behind my car shortened, snapping back like a stretched rubber band, and for a second I saw open fields again beyond the town edge, like the exit had been restored by refusing to feed the system. Resource loss followed fast, because my phone vibrated even though it was off, and the screen lit up on its own, showing my driver account with a single message: deactivated for safety violations. My stomach dropped because my car payment clock didn't care about haunted towns, and I'd just burned the only income stream I had. That loss felt fair in a way that made me angry, because the town punished good choices the same way it punished bad ones. The older man met my eyes. Now go. Don't look back. My passenger stepped toward the car, and the sidewalk under their foot crumbled in a silent puff. Not into gore, not into bones, but into fine gray ash that rose and then fell like snow that forgot how to float. The smell hit hard, and it wasn't smoke anymore. It was the dry smell of a fireplace after a long winter, the smell of something finished. My passenger stumbled, and duty forced a clean decision. I grabbed their elbow and pulled them into my car, even though touching felt like breaking another invisible rule. The map voice returned, but it didn't give directions this time. It spoke a single line in my own tone. Proceed. I didn't. I drove straight toward the fields I'd glimpsed. Not the route arrow, not the detour, because sometimes competence means refusing the interface. The fire station bell rang behind us, and I kept my eyes forward until my vision blurred, because the mirror was a temptation, and the banner was a hook. The county line sign appeared again, and this time it stayed, and the guardrails didn't dissolve, and my tires hit a patch of rough gravel that felt like real road under me. My passenger sobbed once quietly, and the sound grounded me more than any rule. I kept driving until the town lights shrank into the distance, and my chest finally let go of the read. Closed for renovation in uneven red. Closed for renovation in uneven letters. My passenger limped inside and sat on the curb by the ice chest, and the normal fluorescent buzz made my eyes sting because it sounded like safety. I did the responsible thing that would ruin me anyway. I turned my phone back on and opened the hazard report screen because warning other drivers mattered more than my deactivated account. The draft report sat in that strange G6 folder again, and this time it asked for an attachment. So I uploaded the last still frame I'd seen before I drowned the dash cam, the one with the figure holding my map. The upload bar filled, then stalled at 99%, and a prompt appeared with a line that looked like it had been copied from the diner card. Submit proof, then proceed. I deleted the file instead, and the prompt disappeared, which made my hands tremble with relief and fury because the system had still been negotiating. My passenger said from the curb, voice raw, "Will they follow us?" I keep asking myself that, I said, because the question felt like the only honest thing left. The gas station printer by the counter whirred without being touched, and a receipt slid out slowly, blank except for one line printed in the same friendly font as the banner. No free detours. A paper notice was taped beside it, edges curling, ink slightly smeared like someone had tried to wipe it away, and it read, "If you've seen that symbol before, don't ignore it." Later, when I checked my phone in daylight, the hazard report wasn't in sent, and my deactivation notice wasn't in my account history, but a new folder sat on my home screen that I didn't create. The folder name was G6, and every icon inside pointed back toward that town that burned down in 1902.